All right, hello and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about the question, why do I have these intrusive thoughts, or why do I keep having intrusive thoughts? Why do I have intrusive thoughts about this theme, right? Kind of all those questions wrapped into one, because they're really the same question. So let's go ahead and dive in. Right before we do, if you enjoy this show or you're benefiting from this, please help us out by liking, subscribing, and leaving a nice review on iTunes or Spotify. Also, if you're looking for help and guidance on your path to recovery from intrusive thoughts or OCD and anxiety, I have some links down in the notes for you, or you can head over to restoredminds.com as we have some great resources for you as well. So let's move to the question: why do you have these intrusive thoughts? And the answer, surprisingly, is quite simple. It's just because you keep appraising them as intrusive, because you keep essentially judging them, and that judgment causes you to react emotionally. That emotion, that resistance to the emotion, then ultimately leads to a compulsion, and that compulsion ultimately leads to this loop forming. I mean, that's really the short answer, right? Mark Freeman, who makes some just phenomenal content as well. I've never met him personally. I have read his book. Someone that he did a great video one time on just the idea of, like, you can choose to never have an intrusive thought again just by never labeling a thought intrusive. You know, it seems very simple, but in many ways there's such a profound truth to it. Now, I will say that that's not as easy intellectually, right? It doesn't just happen intellectually. What happens is that as you release the emotion that underlies the intrusive thoughts, what happens is you're able to shift into a much higher energy state where you can really appraise the thoughts totally different. And so it's not this intellectual thing you say, well, I'm just going to decide I don't have intrusive thoughts anymore. What he's saying is actually very profound truth. And I totally agree with him. But I want to just elaborate on it, that it's not this, like, you don't think your way into that, right? It's experiential in many ways. And what happens is when you raise your own consciousness, you move into higher energy states out of this fear energy. What happens is you're able to see the intrusive thoughts totally differently, and you really don't see them as intrusive. I don't have quote unquote intrusive thoughts anymore, simply because I give myself permission. My mind is allowed to create any thought it wants. I don't have this box of, you're not allowed to create these thoughts and you're allowed to create these thoughts, because if I have that box, what happens is that I react to these thoughts, or I try to stop them. I do compulsions, or I get emotionally reactive, which then leads to compulsions and leaves me to get stuck in this loop, right? Like I explained, I lived this way for many years of my life, so I totally understand this concept. Um, what so to answer your question of why you have intrusive thoughts, my my opinion is because you have a ton of stored emotion in your body. Now, and this is going to dive into concepts, that obviously I've learned and implemented from books like Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, the Sedona Method by Hal Dwoskin, and originally founded by Lester Levinson. Also things like Michael Singer and Eckhart Tolle, and a lot of different teachers, right? But thought is the very end form that we experience, and often underneath thought is emotion. When we release the emotion correlated with a thought just becomes a thought. And like I was explaining in the first part of this series, the initial problem that most people are actually experiencing, or the thing that they're actually wanting to get rid of, is the emotional experience. Because when you remove the emotion about a situation and you're able to release that energy, the thought just becomes a thought, right? And we know this if you think of like a memory, right? If you think about like an ex that dumped you a long time ago, not a fresh breakup, but like a long time ago, and it's something that doesn't bother you anymore. It's not that like that thought isn't there. It's literally that you've released all the emotion about the experience. If you think about a thought and you have a lot of internal disturbance that comes up for you, that emotion is still there and needs to be released. That's why in Taking Back Control, in our 12-week program, and even in the book From Stuck to Unstuck, I talk so much about the idea of actually learning to release emotion, because at the core, that's what you're really wanting. You're wanting to feel better, right? Even this question of why do I have the intrusive thoughts? The thought behind the question is, if I figure this out, it'll make the thoughts go away and then I'll feel better, right? Because if I told you, for instance, hey, okay, I'm going to give you the perfect answer, but you're still going to feel the way you feel, do you really want the answer? You know, like, was the answer really that helpful? You're probably, many of you are probably going to perceive the initial answer I gave as unhelpful, when really, if you really understood what I'm saying there, it's like your key to freedom from it. It's that your appraisal, your judgment of the thought as intrusive, as this thought isn't supposed to be here, is the actual cause. The belief system that that's not supposed to be here is the actual cause of the energetic experience that you're having. And your resistance to that the emotional experience is paradoxically what's keeping that energy going. So the fear that you're experiencing in your body, your mind is going to reflect that, right? So as you experience fear in your body, your mind's going to come up with a justification of the presence of that fear, which is why the intrusive thoughts tend to spout up to begin with. You're having this, a lot of times we're really unconscious of our emotional experiences in our body because we're so in our mind all the time, that the intrusive thought seems like it, quote, comes out of nowhere, right? I hear that all the time. Everything was good, Matt. I was trekking along, having a grand old life, and this intrusive thought just came up out of nowhere, right? What if XYZ, right? Whatever that fill in the blank of whatever your intrusive thought is. In almost every case of every person I've worked with who's dealt with intrusive thoughts, as we kind of peel back the layers of this, the person usually is very unconscious about a lot of the energy they're experiencing. They're just in their mind a lot, right? And they're very unaware of kind of what's going on in their body emotionally. So they're bouncing around from whatever their mind is saying, whatever problem they're focused on that day, and they're just kind of bouncing and bouncing and bouncing and bouncing, and just kind of directed by their mind. Becoming conscious is about, hey, what's going, like, I know my mind is saying this stuff, but what's also going on in my body from a feeling perspective? And more importantly, not identifying with either. Like, you are really not your mind, which is why intrusive thoughts actually don't matter, because they're not you. You are aware of your mind, of what your mind is saying, of the thoughts that are happening in your mind. You're aware of the emotions that you're experiencing in your body. One of the things that makes us appraise and judge intrusive thoughts in such a negative way is because we falsely identify with the mind. So that's another reason why you might have intrusive thoughts, is because you're so falsely identified with your mind that when the thoughts happen, you get so reactive. When you get reactive, you paradoxically do things that create more of them. Another possible answer there, right? And what you'll find, though, is no matter how many ways I answer this question for you of why you have intrusive thoughts, the intellectual answer will never resolve the emotional experience, because the emotion ultimately needs to be experienced and felt and released. Now, the paradox is once you release the emotion underneath the experience, the thought just becomes a thought. A memory just becomes a memory. That really is at the core here of what we're talking about here when I talk about why intrusive thoughts are not the real problem, is because what we actually want to do is disengage the mind and actually release the underlying emotion. One of the reasons that we know intrusive thoughts are intrusive thoughts, and this may warrant just a whole separate episode in and of itself. In fact, I think I will. I'll save that for next episode of, really, how do I know these thoughts are just intrusive thoughts? How do I know these thoughts aren't to be taken seriously? And it's really because of the energy experience of the individual. So I'll kind of briefly summarize this, and then I'll probably just dive into an episode on this next. Really, it's like, so how does someone know these intrusive thoughts are just intrusive thoughts and not about the content of the thought? And it really comes back down to the energetic experience of the person. So when someone's having an intrusive, harmful thought, let's say, it's very different of a mother, a loving mother to her kids that says, well, I had this intrusive thought, what if I hurt my kids? to someone who literally and the dominant energy is fear that the person's experiencing, versus someone who is just filled with rage and actually having the thoughts of like, I want to hurt this person because they're so outwardly angry at that individual. Two totally different emotional experiences. And that's how we often are, that's how we're able to determine whether something's a quote intrusive thought that's treated through the methodology of OCD and anxiety, versus someone who's having thoughts that are, that actually make them a potential danger, or actually um, something to be taken more seriously and maybe need a different level of intervention. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, I hope this idea was helpful. The real summary of this episode that I want you to take away is there's no answer as to why you have the intrusive thoughts that's ever going to satisfy and get rid of the thoughts and the emotion. And even your pursuit in that question, the only reason you want the answer is because you think it will satisfy this feeling that you're having. And what it's actually needs to happen is letting go of that answer, realizing that these thoughts are here, and actually learning to confront the emotions that are underneath them. That really is your path to freedom. So with that, I hope this was helpful. Hope you found it beneficial. And I look forward to continuing this series, where I think in the next episode, I'm going to talk about this idea of how do we know something's an intrusive thought, and going into more of that energy discussion. And with that said, look forward to seeing you there, and I hope you have a great day and a great week. See you soon. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com, as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.